At the end of the last lecture, I didn't quite complete all of the user interface stuff. So what I'd like to do is run through the last couple of slides, or the last section of slides, on task-centered designs. So this is, there's also a section on surveys. You had a chance to play with this or to design some surveys in your last tutorial. But I'd like to just run through the task-centered design slides because I think this will be quite useful for your group project. It really ties into a lot of the assessment criteria on, say, user surveys, really links to this, which is essentially the idea that we want you to be designing your site or any system with giving thought to who the users are and meeting real needs of users at every stage of the process. So yeah, task-centered design. I suppose the key takeaway I want you to all get out of this area is that any system you design, so your site for your group project, but just any system in general, it is there to meet the needs of real people, of actual users. There must exist some users for which your system satisfies a need. Otherwise, there's no point in designing it. So I suppose that the first stage in any design process is you need to actually work out who your users are. So who exactly do you want to target your system at, and exactly what are you going to provide to them. But once you've done that, you need to work out exactly who will be using your system. So for instance, it's try and separate the users into, work out what different types of users you might have. So for instance, let's say you're designing an e-commerce system, like say an eBay, a version of eBay. Okay, so you could say that just will be general people who want to buy and sell things over the internet will be using it. But you can actually break that up more. You can say that you will have people who want to use the system to buy things. You'll have people who want to use the system to sell things. You'll have people who work for eBay and are trying to administer the system. So you've got lots of different classes of users. So try and work out who these classes and who these groups of users are. And then also try and work out what they will want to do with the system. Once you know who the potential users for your system are, you can then go through, continue on and do things like work out a specific set of requirements for your system. So work out what tasks you'll be supporting, come up with an initial design, and then do some evaluations and continue on in an iterative fashion. I'll go through each of those phases individually. So yeah, as I mentioned before, the first thing you need to do is get in touch with people who might actually be using your system and work out the different ways in which people will want to interact with your site. So work out who the different groups of users are. The example I use being like an e-commerce site where you've got people who want to buy, sell, or administer. You might have something very similar, say, with like a timetabling website. You have students, so people who want to actually access their own timetables. You'll have staff, so people who don't have a timetable themselves but administer it from the perspective of opening and closing labs, specifying when classes will be. You'll have people like, say, timetable officers, or people who administer it more from a technical standpoint, so not to do with the specific courses but administering the actual system. So again, there's lots of different types of roles or types of users that you can have for a system, and these users will all interact in different ways with the system. Once you know who your users are, then you want to you want to work out what are the concrete tasks that the users will want to accomplish with your system. And again, you then want to separate those tasks into the, say, routine tasks. So let's say, thinking of like a banking application. So a routine task might be checking your, users might want to do things like check their balance. They might want to transfer money to another account. They might want to move funds between, let's say they have multiple accounts, they might want to move funds between those. So those are your routine tasks that will be performed often by a large set of users. But then also try and identify tasks that fall into other categories. So infrequent but very important, so things that people need to be able to do with your system but won't necessarily have to do regularly, and things that people don't have to do regularly aren't that important, but it would be nice if your system supported. So with a banking application, an example of something that's infrequent but important might be being able to find out the amount of credit interest you've received over the previous financial year. So you're not going to do this that often. Odds are you'll only really want to find that out, information like that out when you're filing your tax return. So you do that once a year, but it's essential that you know it. So that type of system would need to support being able to work out how much interest you paid over a year. However, that differs from other behaviour in that while it's an important feature for you to support, it's infrequent, and then you could have other features that might just be useful but are not necessarily crucial to the system. They're more like enhancements. So how can you actually go about identifying tasks? So this one, possibly not quite as relevant for your website, possibly, but in many systems what you can actually do is immerse yourself in the user's environment. So let's say, for instance, I can actually give an example of this from my own work. So I'm a research student here in the School of IT, and a large part of my work focuses on trying to improve search efficiency for over medical literature for public health doctors. So at the start of my project, so a few years ago, there's one of my supervisors is actually in the School of Public Health here at the school. They were kind enough to let me basically attach me to a project that they were doing, and while I don't have the technical experience in the public health field, I was able to, I suppose, sort of shadow and observe what they were doing and get a feel for how they were actually going about performing the searches that I was going to try and improve. So, yeah, I mean, the goal of doing something like this then is you want to actually have a proper understanding of what challenges the people you want your system to support face in real life. From a research perspective, one thing that you always, one risk you always run is not understand, or is coming up with something that might be really cool or really fun to say me from a technical or theoretical perspective, but that no one in real life would ever actually want to use. So by doing something like this, you can then try and avoid running into that situation because you actually have a proper understanding of what the users want to accomplish, and that will help you best support their needs. So it's not always possible for every system to be able to do something like this, but yeah, you try and put yourselves in the shoes of the people who will actually be using the system, and if you can, go out and talk to them. Try and actually get involved in what they do and get an understanding for what they will want out of your site or your system so that you can best support their needs. So there's a good example of this. Jeff Hawkins, the inventor of the Palm Pilot, was, when he was designing it, said to have carried around a lump of wood in his pocket. Just in everyday situations, he would take the lump of wood out and imagine it was a Palm Pilot or his new system and think about how he would want to actually use it. So again, it's just sort of goes to thinking about how would your users actually want to interact with your system, and then when you're designing it, you can cater to their actual needs rather than your potentially incorrect assumptions as to what their needs are. If all else fails, again, you can just try and put yourself mentally into the shoes of your potential users and describe try and describe a concrete set of tasks that you might want to accomplish with your system. So just write down, say, who you think your users will be and the different ways in which they will want to interact with your system. So I'll go through some slides after this on how to come up with good tasks. So there's a set of guidelines you can use. But essentially you want to, again, just if you can't get them from actual users, you can have still a set of concrete tasks that you can use to come up with your initial prototype or initial design, and then when you can actually go and speak to users, you can validate these, you can have these users help you validate those tasks. So essentially, are these tasks actually what you would want to accomplish? Can you try and use our design to accomplish these tasks? And you know, is there anything we could do better? That type of thing. So with good task examples, I suppose, so the first thing is you want to try and have as little assumptions about the design of your system as possible. So the tasks should focus on the goals of the user, so the things that the user actually wants to do, but don't specify how they would go about doing it. So for example, you might have something like, say, using the e-commerce example from before. One task you might have is that a user uses the search interface embedded in the navigation bar to identify a computer game and purchase it. That's not ideal because you're making assumptions that the task that you're using, so the thing that you're going to be trying to evaluate your site against later, you're making explicit assumptions about how the site should present things to the user and how the user should interact with the site. A better way to do this might be something like the user searches for and identifies a specific video game. So in this, you're essentially describing the same task, but you've now removed any assumptions about the interface. So focus on what the user wants to do, but not how they go about doing it. Also, again, it's better to be specific. Because you'd like to use these to help evaluate your site design, so when you get to things like, say, designing storyboards, you want to be as specific as possible. So if you can actually do it, name names. So again, using the e-commerce example, user searches for the game Borderlands 2 and purchases it. So again, this gives a much more specific, concrete task. So when you go to actually evaluate against it, it's much easier to work out whether or not you can. So yeah, be as specific as possible. So describe a complete job. So an example here might be something with, say, a timetable department. So you might say that someone wants to change their timetable. That's not as specific as we would like. So let's say they shift from the Tuesday 9 a.m. Info 1003 lab to the Wednesday 4 p.m. Info 1003 lab. This also is a complete task. So you could say, you could break that up more and I suppose have several subtasks in there. So you would first have to identify when other tutorials are available. So get a list of tutorials that are available in Info 1003. And then once you've identified one of those, you have a second task, transfer from your current class to that second class. It's better to have a task here that encompasses the whole action of identifying a free lab and then transferring it, because this, I suppose, then gives you the ability to have a task that uses, it's more like something that users would actually go about doing. It involves all features of the website, or more than one set of features in the website, and yeah, enables, I suppose, the user to. It's more like a full realistic task. You're not going to say identify a list of free tutorials. If you're doing that, you have other things that you want to then do with that information. So best to have tasks that encompass entire tasks. Excuse me, sir. So yeah, going back to what I was saying earlier about being as specific as possible. Name names if you can. So user, let's say, changes, so with the timetable example, you change your enrollment from the 9 a.m. You identify a free lab and change your tutorial from the Tuesday 9 a.m. lab to that second free tutorial. Well, there are multiple different users who could do this. It could be you as the student doing this. It could be a course administrator doing this. It could be someone affiliated with the timetable department. These different users would interact with the system in different ways. They'd have different expectations. So going back to, I think I had in the last lecture, mentioned about users, you have different, say, levels of user. You have, say, power users, people who are very familiar with the system and the task that you actually need to accomplish, and people who say, people who are, say, very familiar with the task that they want to accomplish. They know the domain, but they don't necessarily know the system. Well, that might be an example. The timetable example gives us, or we can see that in the timetable example. You'd have students. You're possibly not as familiar with the timetabling system, so the system you're using to change or to vary an enrollment. But someone, say, affiliated with the timetable department, if they were to try and make that change, they're more likely to be a power user. So by creating two separate tasks and specifying in each case who the users are, we now don't just have a task that a requirement that the system should facilitate varying an enrollment. We've broken it up, and we've got the system should support a power user, namely the person from the timetabling department varying an enrollment, and the system should support a novice user or a less expert user, so say the student varying their enrollment. So yeah, name names, because this then helps you, it puts assumptions there about what they actually know and their expectations about how they should interact with the system. Yes. Finally, so tasks. So again, going back to what I was saying earlier about you want your system to meet the needs of real users. These tasks, if possible, evaluate them. So speak to real users once you've got your set of tasks. Ask the users, do these tasks meet your actual expectations? Is this a realistic sample of the actions that you actually want to take with, say, our finished system? Also, you can run into situations where if you're gathering requirements, sometimes users don't really know what they want. If, say, you're talking to some users and they suggest some features that they want to see in a given system, you might go and prototype that and show them an example of the system, and they might say, actually, that's really not what we wanted. We'd rather it be done in some different way. So that's actually a key part of this, and I'll mention it later. I've got in some later slides, is that good user-oriented, user-focused design should be iterative. You don't just have the users involved initially come up with a design and then have them not involved again until everything's completed. You need them involved at all stages of the project I suppose, as you have your initial set of tasks, you come up with your initial design, you then go and check that with your users, so to ensure not just that your design meets the tasks that you've set out, but that your initial set of tasks were indeed accurate. And again, you can then vary these tasks, work out which ones are the routine key features that need to be supported by the system, and which ones are the nice but not required enhancements, and which ones are the infrequent but crucial set of tasks that need to be there. So very important to, say, a small set of users, or very infrequent but very important, so they still have to be in there, but not, say, used as widely as some of the routine tasks. So an example there, again, you can think of, like with the banking example, being able to get information to be able to complete your tax return. Once you've got your initial set of tasks, so you've spoken to your users, you have an understanding of who wants to use your system and the different things they might want to accomplish with it, you then want to go about getting a set of actual requirements, so deciding which tasks and which features your system will actually support. So yeah, it's perfectly reasonable to assume that your system won't be able to cater to everyone's needs. So there may be some things that your system won't be able to cater to. But by speaking to users first and getting a set of tasks that's representative of their expectations and also working out which are the, getting a set of key tasks as well as working out which are the really important, say, very important but less frequently used features, you can then come up with a design that won't omit anything crucial, or you can have a good working design by understanding your actual user base. Yeah, so not every design can work for everyone, but you do need to be able to use your information that you gained in that initial phase to be able to prioritize tasks and features that you want to support. Once you've actually designed, once you know what requirements you're going to support, you then need to design some scenarios. So these, rather than say specific single tasks, you might describe something that's a sort of larger set of actions encompassing multiple tasks. So here you're not just thinking of what the user wants to do with the system, you're thinking about things like how they would interact with the system. So for example, are they going to be performing this action on a tablet? Are they going to be performing this action at on a desktop PC? Think about essentially how that user might interact with the system to perform, say, a number of tasks. So as an example, this might link to, say, something like a storyboard. So a storyboard, it's very similar to designing a scenario, but essentially it's just you can do it like just a mock-up with like a cartoony style, just drawing, sequence of steps that show a user moving through a set of tasks and interacting with the system. So for example, this is an example of a storyboard to do with a user having, say, a palm-held device to help them engage in learning at a university, or to engage with learning in a classroom setting. So for example, this storyboard, whereas individual tasks might focus on, say, they use their tool to bring up a set of slides that they're currently viewing and identify key information. A storyboard might be a set of tasks that the user would accomplish over an entire, say, classroom, over an entire class. And it's taking into account not just the user, say, brings up that piece of information. It's taking into account what they're doing at the time when they're accomplishing this task, and also how they're interacting with the system. So you want here just sort of a larger set of steps that describe, say, a typical extended user interaction with the system. Finally, once you've got your set of storyboards, you can then use these to, I suppose, help you debug an interface. So you can, once you've actually got your initial design, you can then consider how, let's say you were to go through the steps in this, let's say you were to try and actually accomplish the tasks set out in one of your storyboards or your scenarios. You can then see how exactly you would be interacting with the system and consider whether or not what you're doing could be improved in any way. So I've got a bit of a kind of tried example here, but let's say we have a design for a door and we have a scenario enters the building. So you have to go through the door. So we might have, the person walks up to the door, takes hold of the door handle, and then opens the door and enters it. Well, okay, so this is our initial design. User walks up to the door, takes hold of the handle, turns the handle, and then, okay, so now do we push or pull? So you can then see, by trying to step through our example of enters the door, we run into the situation that we see there's something in the interface that's not exactly clear here or could be improved. So a better version would be something like, say, this, push or pull. So then it's clear from the example how you need to interact with the system is made a little clearer by the interface that's being presented. So that's just a toy example, but you get the idea that by stepping through, once we've got our initial design, by then stepping through or trying to complete a task with our system, we can then see where there are things that could be improved or aspects to the interface that could be refined.